Hello and welcome to AP World History and our first unit, which is the Global Tapestry from 1200 to 1450. Okay, so before we start, I'm just going to go ahead and say this. I'm totally new to this, recording myself and, all that stuff. And I'm going to say a lot, and I'm going to end up looking at myself in the corner rather than up here a lot. And hopefully the video is like super bad resolution. I'm also, as you can see, Gwyneth Paltrowing this whole situation. I mean, right now there's a virus, and I haven't bought makeup in 4 months, and God knows this is the first time I've even tried to brush my hair. So we're all gonna just get through this together with a little bit of honesty from me. We'll have special guests, like today, our special guest. Oh, wait. See, I'm so old. Oh, my gosh. Barack Obama. Ooh, look. There's Barack Obama. Oh, there he is. Okay. The President of the United States. I know what you're thinking. You're like, Miss Smith, it's 2020. Yeah, so there is Barack Obama, President of the United States. He's going to hang out behind us today. And probably every day until November. So anyways, our first unit. Okay, so you have signed up for an A-push class. Okay, I had to take a moment because you didn't sign up for A-push. You signed up for AP World History. So anyways, like I said. Okay, so, this is our first slide, developments in East Asia. But before we go on, I want you to understand the context. So we're going to be looking at a whole bunch of different regions from 1200 to 1450. Several very large empires are going to rise up. They're going to dominate the world. Some were modified revivals of earlier empires. Some will be brand new. Some spread their culture. Others adopt culture where they go. So you get this revival finally after the dark ages of these very large empires, and most of them are going to be in the East. But you also have very large empires in Mesoamerica, the Aztecs. You can see the Mayans as well. The Middle East has several large ones. Africa has quite a few large land empires rising up. So it's a time where people began to once again, I suppose, conquer each other, move around, and as they moved around, they opened trade routes. A lot of these large land empires were basically just based on trade. And so as trade spread, so did new ideas, technology. It's going to spread throughout at least the large area connected. So without further ado, let's move on. The Song dynasty in China was the leading example of diversity and innovation in Afro-Eurasia and the Americas during the 13th century. China enjoyed great wealth, political stability, and fine artistic and intellectual achievements. NEO-CONFUCIANISM shaped the government and the social classes and the family system. In addition, China developed the greatest manufacturing capability in the world. However, the spread of Confucianism and Buddhism might be the most enduring testimony to Chinese influence. The Song dynasty replaced the Tang dynasty in 960 and ruled for more than 3 centuries. They lost control of northern lands to invading pastoralists from Manchuria who set up the Yuan Empire. Although the Song ruled a smaller region than the Tang, their reign was prosperous, and under them the arts flourished. China's strength was partially the result of its imperial bureaucracy. This was a vast organization in which officials carried out the empire's policies. The bureaucracy had been a feature of China going all the way back to 221 BCE under the Qin dynasty. It represented a continuity across centuries and dynasties. One of the best features of the Song dynasty was that it expanded educational opportunities to young men of lower economic classes so that they could score well on the civil service exams. By scoring well, a young man could obtain a highly desired job in the bureaucracy. These exams were based on knowledge of Confucian texts. Because officials obtained their positions by demonstrating their merit on these exams, China's bureaucratic system became known as a meritocracy. Though the poor were vastly underestimated in this bureaucracy, the Chinese system allowed for more upward mobility than any other hiring system of its time. However, by the end of the Song dynasty, the bureaucracy had grown so large that it contributed to the empire's weakness. By creating so many jobs and by paying these officials so handsomely, the Song increased the cost of government to the point that they began drying up China's wealth. The flourishing Tang dynasty had successfully promoted agricultural development, improved roads and canals. They had encouraged foreign trade and spread technology. All of these accomplishments benefited the Song dynasty who followed, especially the Grand Canal. This was an inexpensive and efficient internal waterway, which allowed for the connection of the vast region of China. It extended over 30,000 miles. Expanding the canal enabled China under the Song dynasty to become the most populous trading area in the world. Also, further inventions like gunpowder and the compass for navigation increased trade. For gunpowder, this may have been invented in earlier times, but inventors in the Song dynasty made the first guns. Over centuries, the technology of making gunpowder and guns spread from China to all parts of Eurasia via traders on the Silk Road. Sometime before the 11th century, champa rice, a fast ripening and drought-resistant strain of rice from the Champa Kingdom in present-day Vietnam, greatly expanded agricultural production in China. This rice and other strains developed through experimentation allowed farming to spread to lands where once rice could not grow, such as lowlands, riverbanks, and hills. In some areas, it also allowed farmers to grow 2 crops of rice per year, a summer crop and a winter crop. Innovative methods of production contributed to agricultural success. For example, Chinese farmers put manure or poop, both human and animal, on fields to enrich the soil. They built elaborate irrigation systems using ditches, water wheels, pumps, and terraces to increase productivity. New heavy plows pulled by water buffalo or oxen allowed previously unusable land to now be cultivated. The combination of these changes in agriculture produced an abundance of food. As a result, China's population grew quickly. In the 3 centuries of the Song dynasty rule, China's population increased from around 25% of the total world population to nearly 40%. Industrial production soared, as did China's population. China's discovery of black earth, or what we call coal today, in the 4th century BCE enabled it to produce greater amounts of cast iron goods. The massive use of coal to power machines wouldn't happen until the 18th century. China did have the greatest manufacturing capability in the world. The Chinese later learned how to take the carbon out of cast iron and began to manufacture steel. They used steel to make or reinforce bridges, gates, and to make ship anchors. They also used steel to make religious items, such as pagodas and Buddhist figurines. Steel also strengthened the agricultural equipment, contributing to the abundance of food production as well. Under the Song dynasty, and earlier than in Western Europe, China experienced proto-industrialization, a set of economic changes in which people in rural areas made more goods than they could sell. Unlike later industrialization, which featured large-scale production in factories using complex machinery, proto-industrialization relied more on home-based or community-based production using simple equipment. For example, skilled craft workers produced steel and other products in widely dispersed smelting facilities under the supervision of the imperial government. Artisans also manufactured porcelain and silk that reached consumers through expanding trade networks, especially by sea. Porcelain was highly desired because it was lightweight yet strong. Further, it was light-colored, so it could be easily painted with elaborate designs. The Chinese used the compass in maritime navigation, and they redesigned their ships to carry more cargo. China's ability to print paper navigational charts made seafaring possible in open waters, out of sight of land, and sailors became less reliant on the sky for direction. China became the world's most commercialized society. Its economy changed from local consumption to market production, with porcelains, textiles, and tea the chief exports. The Grand Canal supported a vibrant internal trade, while advances in naval technology allowed China to control trade in the South China Sea. The Song dynasty also promoted the growth of commercial economy by changing how they built public projects such as roads and irrigation canals. Instead of requiring that people labor on these projects, the government paid people to work on them. What a novel idea. This change increased the amount of money in circulation, promoting economic growth. Another source of income for the government came from the tributary system, an arrangement in which other states had to pay money or provide goods to honor the Chinese emperor. This system cemented China's economic and political power over several foreign countries, but it also created stability and stimulated trade for all parties involved. The origins of this system existed in the Han dynasty. By the time of the Song dynasty, Japan, Korea, and kingdoms throughout Southeast Asia were tributary states. The emperor expected representatives from tributary states to demonstrate their respect by performing a kowtow, a ritual in which anyone greeting the Chinese emperor must bow his or her head until it reached the floor. The Chinese sent out tremendous fleets led by Zheng He to demonstrate the power of the emperor and to receive tribute. Through most of Chinese history, the majority of people lived in rural areas. However, urban areas grew in prominence in this productive period. At the height of the Song dynasty, China was the most urbanized land in the world, boasting several cities containing more than 100,000 people. These cities were then linked by the Grand Canal. Though urbanization represented a significant development in China, life in the countryside grew more complex as well. The bureaucratic expansion created an entirely new social class called the scholar gentry. They soon outnumbered the aristocracy, which was comprised of landowners who inherited their wealth. The scholar gentry were educated in Confucian philosophy and became the most influential social class in China. 3 other classes ranked below the scholar gentry: farmers, artisans, and merchants. The low status of merchants reflected Confucian respect for hard work and creating value. The tasks of merchants did not require physical strength or endurance, and they simply exchanged goods without growing or making anything new. Lower rungs of Chinese society included peasants who worked for wealthy landowners, often to pay off debts, and the urban poor. The Song government provided aid to the poor and established public hospitals where people could receive free health care. Wow, when was that? Free health care. Wow. Confucian traditions included both respect for women and the expectation that they would defer to men. The patriarchal pattern strengthened during the Tang and Song dynasties. One distinctive constraint on women's activities in China was the practice of foot binding, which became common among aristocratic families during the Song dynasty. From a very young age, girls had their feet wrapped so tightly that the bones did not grow naturally. A bound foot signified social status, something suitors particularly desired. It also restricted women's ability to move and hence to participate in the public sphere. Foot binding was finally banned in 1912. During the Tang and the Song eras, China enjoyed affluence, a well-educated populace, and extensive contact with foreign nations. As a result, intellectual pursuits in technology, literature, and the visual arts flourished. The Chinese had invented paper as early as the 2nd century CE, and they developed a system of printing in the 7th century. They were the first culture to use woodblock printing. A Buddhist scripture produced in the 7th century is thought to be the world's first woodblock printed work. In the Song era, printed booklets were sent out to all the farmers in the rice-growing regions. The development of paper and printing expanded the availability of books. Though most peasants were illiterate, China's privileged classes had increased access to literature. Confucian scholars not only consumed literature at a tremendous rate, they were also the major producers of literature throughout the era. The Tang and the Song dynasties' emphasis on schooling created generations of well-rounded scholar bureaucrats. Later Europeans with such diverse skills would be called Renaissance men. Buddhism had come to China from its birthplace in India via the Silk Roads. Its presence is evident during the anarchic period between later Han and the Sui dynasties. However, its popularity became widespread during the Tang dynasty. The 7th century Buddhist monk Yuan Yang helped build Buddhism's popularity in China. 3 forms of Buddhism from India came to shape Asia, each developing a different emphasis. Theravada Buddhism focused on personal spiritual growth through silent meditation and self-discipline. It became strongest in Southeast Asia. Mahayana Buddhism focused on spiritual growth for all beings and on service. It became strongest in China and Korea. Tibetan Buddhism focused on chanting. It became strongest in Tibet. All 3 include a belief in the 4 Noble Truths, which stress the idea that personal suffering can be alleviated by eliminating desire and by following Buddhist law. All 3 also embrace the Eightfold Path. This is the ideas including right speech, right livelihood, right effort, and right mindfulness that can lead to enlightenment or nirvana. Monks introduced Buddhism to the Chinese by relating its beliefs to Taoist principles. For example, Buddhism's idea of Dharma became translated as the Tao or the Way. Eventually, Buddhist doctrines combined with elements of Taoist traditions created a syncretic or focused, this means a kind of a religion that joined together. I can't even say that word. We have fun, don't we, children? This is fun. I'm not starting over. So anyways, these two religions joined together to form a type of Buddhism called Zen Buddhism. Like Taoism, Zen Buddhism emphasized direct experience in meditation as opposed to formal learning based on studying scripture. Because of its fusion with Chinese beliefs, Buddhism became very popular in China. Monasteries, or buildings where monks lived together, appeared in most major cities. The presence of these monasteries became a problem for the Tang bureaucracy. Many leaders of the Tang dynasty, which considered itself the Middle Kingdom, had trouble accepting that a foreign religion would have such prominence in society. Buddhism's popularity, which drew individuals away from China's native religions, made Taoists and Confucians jealous. Despite monasteries being closed and land seizures, however, Zen Buddhism remained popular among ordinary Chinese citizens. The Song dynasty was somewhat more friendly towards Buddhism, but it did not go out of its way to promote the religion. It preferred to emphasize China's native traditions, such as Confucianism. However, Buddhism had a strong presence, and many Confucians began to adopt its ideals into their daily lives. The development of printing had made Buddhist scriptures widely available. The Song dynasty, though, they benefited from the Confucian ideal of loyalty and duty to your family. This emphasis on respect for one's elders helped the Song maintain their rule in China. NEO-Confucianism evolved in China between 770 and 840 CE. It was a syncretic system combining rational thought with the more abstract ideas of Taoism and Buddhism. This new incarnation of Confucianism emphasized ethics rather than the mysteries of God and nature. It became immensely popular in countries in China's orbit, including Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. An important dynamic in the histories of Japan, Korea, and Vietnam was each country's relationship with China. When China was unified, its political strength, economic wealth, religious traditions, intellectual advances, and technological innovations made it the world's most powerful realm. Its smaller neighbors benefited from being so close to China, but faced a challenge of maintaining their own distinctive cultures. Each had to confront the issue of sinification, or the assimilation of Chinese traditions and practices. Since Japan was separated from China by a sea rather than land, it had more ability to control its interactions with China than Korea or Vietnam could. The impact of Chinese culture appeared in many aspects of life. In 574 to 622, Japan's Prince Tashi promoted Buddhism and Confucianism along with Japan's traditional Shinto religion. During this era, Japan learned how to do woodblock printing from China. During the Heian period, from 694 to 1185, Japan emulated Chinese traditions in politics, art, and literature. However, Japanese writers also moved in new directions. For example, in the 11th century, a Japanese writer composed the world's first novel, The Tale of Genji. It is a story of a Japanese prince and his life at court, particularly his many, many romances. For hundreds of years, Japan had been a feudal society without a centralized government. Land-owning aristocrats, known as the daimyo class, battled for control of land, while the majority of people worked as rice farmers. Quietly turning the page. Japanese feudalism was similar to European feudalism, which we will learn about in section 1.6. Both featured very little social mobility, and both systems were built upon hereditary hierarchies. In Japan, peasants, known as serfs, were born into lives of economic dependency, while samurai, who were kind of like the knights, were born into their roles as protectors, and daimyos, or aristocrats, were born into lives of privilege. In Europe, the three groups were serfs, knights, and nobles. What distinguishes Japanese feudalism from that of Europe was that the daimyo enjoyed much more power than nobility in Europe did. The daimyo ruled over vast stretches of land, and in reality were more powerful than either the emperor or the shogun. By contrast, Europe's hierarchy placed the monarch above the nobility. In Europe, there were periods when authority and power structure fell and nobles were able to accumulate more power, but mainly European feudalism remained kind of centralized power structure and won't completely leave until the modern industrial era. Japan also differed from China in how it was governed. China was ruled by an emperor who oversaw a large civilian bureaucracy. For much of its history, China had a central government strong enough to promote trade and peace. In contrast, when the Heian court declined, a powerful landowning family called the Miyamoto clan took charge. In 1192, the Miyamoto instilled a shogun, or military ruler, to reign. Though Japan still had an emperor, he had little power. For the following 4 centuries, Japan suffered from regional rivalries among aristocrats. It's not until the 17th century will shoguns then create a strong, centralized government that could unify the country. Korea's location gave it a very direct relationship with China. The countries shared a land boundary, and China extended both north and south of Korea. Through its tributary relationship, Korea and China were in close contact. Thus, Korea emulated many aspects of China's politics and culture. It centralized its government in the style of the Chinese. Culturally, Koreans adopted both Confucian and Buddhist beliefs. The educated elite studied Confucian classics, while Buddhist doctrine attracted the peasant masses. Koreans adopted the Chinese writing system, which proved to be very awkward. The Chinese and Korean languages remained structurally very different. In the 15th century, Korea developed its own writing system. One important difference between Korea and China was that the landed aristocracy were more powerful in Korea than in China. As a result, the Korean elite were able to prevent certain Chinese reforms from ever being implemented. For example, though there was a Korean civil service examination, it was not open to peasants. Thus, there was no truly merit-based system for entering the bureaucracy. Like Japan and Korea, Vietnam traded with and learned from China. For example, Vietnam adapted the Chinese writing system and some architectural styles. However, Vietnam had a more adversarial relationship with China,
At times, the Vietnamese launched violent rebellions against Chinese influence. Vietnamese culture differed from Chinese culture in several ways, which explains the strong resistance to Chinese power. For example, Vietnamese women enjoyed greater independence in their married lives than did Chinese women in the Confucian tradition. While the Chinese lived in extended families, the Vietnamese preferred nuclear families with just the wife, the husband, and their children. Vietnamese villagers operated independently of a national government. Political centralization was non-existent. Although Vietnam adopted a merit-based bureaucracy of educated men, the Vietnamese system did not function like the Chinese scholar bureaucracy. Instead of loyalty to the emperor, scholar officials in Vietnam owed more allegiance to the village peasants. In fact, Vietnamese scholar officials often led revolts against the government if they deemed it too oppressive. Vietnamese women resented their inferior status under the Chinese. In particular, they rejected the customs of foot binding and polygamy, the practice of having more than one wife at the same time. In spite of Vietnamese efforts to maintain the purity of their own culture, sinification did occur. As the Tang dynasty began to crumble in the 8th century, Vietnamese rebels pushed out China's occupying army. In their battles against the Chinese, they showed a strong capacity for guerrilla warfare, perhaps due to their deep knowledge of their own land. Sometimes, in order to think as a historian, we have to contextualize historical developments. To contextualize is to look at an event, development, or process in history within the situation or context in which it occurs. After you place events in context, you begin to see themes and patterns emerge in history. Historians use these themes and patterns to understand the interactions of laws, institutions, culture, events, and people. For example, one way to understand the Song dynasty's success from 960 to 1279 is to place its political, social, and economic development in the context of what came before and after it. In the context of what came before, the imperial bureaucracy represents a political continuity. Since the bureaucratic system had been in place in earlier dynasties as well. However, its modification under the Song to allow more upward mobility represents a change. Similarly, considering the Song imperial bureaucracy in the economic context of what came after, you might gain insights into causation. That is, the cost of supporting the bureaucracy drained China of its wealth, which in turn helped create problems that led to the decline of the Song dynasty. Contextualizing also promotes understanding of comparisons among different cultures and time periods. In 632, a Chinese Buddhist monk named Xuanzang traveled to India, the birthplace of Buddhism. He traveled west along the Silk Roads to Central Asia, then south and east to India, which he reached in 630. Along the way, he experienced various different cultures, and even once in India, he met with many Buddhist monks and visited Buddhist shrines. He gained more insight into Buddhism, and he stayed there for 17 years when he was finally returned to China, where people greeted him as a celebrity. This was during the Tang dynasty. He brought back many Buddhist texts right at the same time where they began to print. which he spent the rest of his life translating into Chinese. These writings were highly instrumental in the growth of Buddhist scholarship in China. It also, he wrote a book. He kept a journal of his entire journey, and this journal will later be turned into one of the 4 great novels from China during the Ming Dynasty. So this book is actually really, really famous. It's called Journey to the West. And as we see now in Western civilization, this story really features one of my favorite stories in Chinese mythology, called the Monkey King. The Monkey King was, a trickster god. We see it all the time in mythology, and his biggest mistake was hubris. He just thought he was smarter and trickier than everybody else. Does it sound familiar? Theme in mythology? And he began to taunt the gods, and as a result, they got so mad at him, they trapped him. Buddha actually began to taunt Buddha, and Buddha got so upset with him, he trapped him under a mountain. So the Journey to the West is actually a story about a famous monk who is going to unleash the Monkey King. And he's going to have 3 other mythological, friends that are going to help him. And the goal or the journey of this monk is to return the sacred scripts back to India. And it's just a fun story. I mean, there's just stuff all along the way happens to the monk and the Monkey King as he tries to kind of, refine his way. What this story tells us is the great, tremendous ties between China and India. And considering that the largest mountain chain on land, on earth, separated these 2 cultures, and yet they still managed to, in ways, kind of meld together, is really fascinating. And it shows you how important trade routes were during this time period. If you'd like to watch, a show about the Monkey King, Netflix now has 2 series on it. But I encourage you to watch actual films from China. They love Journey to the West, and there's 3 of them actually you can watch that I just adore. So anyways, that's storytelling today. Tell me, how does this story provide a context for the spread of Buddhism in China in light of other developments at that time? Thanks, kids. This is our first unit, and good job.